Welcome to the Disruptive Innovation Festival 2017, an online festival that asks the question, what if we could redesign everything? My name is Kinga and I'll be the host of this session today. And I'm very excited to introduce Jing, Yuge, Thomas and Diana for this session, with whom we'll explore about co-creating value, and particularly in the case of China's sharing economy. Don't forget, this is an interactive session. You can ask all your questions and post comments in the comment box underneath this session page and the video. And you can tweet using hashtag ThinkDiff. Now over to Diana, who will introduce this session a bit more.
Hello, everybody. It's a great pleasure to have these sessions. And we are a team of scientists based at the Environmental Change Institute at the University of Oxford, and we are working on urban transformations towards sustainability issues. And in particular, we are working in megacities such as Shanghai, Istanbul, and also smaller cities like Barcelona, Venice, and Beirut, and mostly coastal cities. In our work, we identify opportunity spaces for transformation, and in this talk, we will focus on part of our work we've done in a particular case study, and we will focus on the opportunity space created by the rapid development of sharing economy in China. With the enabling technologies and massive capital investment in recent years, the sharing economy in China has rapidly expanded the scope from very small niche innovations to basically mainstream activities. So, of course, there are companies like the Chinese Uber, Airbnb, and others. So this is what we are going to focus in this session. And I would like now, so we'll have a conversation with our three researchers here, Lan, Yuge, and Tom. So I would like to start maybe to ask a question to you, Lan. And I would like to, can you introduce a bit the development of sharing economy in China?
Yeah, of course. The key factor of sharing economy is access-based rather than ownership-based consumption of products and services, which are more cheaper, more efficient, and cause less ecological footprints for the same level of human needs. Because of a high population density of and rapid urbanization, the sharing economy brings opportunity to China for its potential to solve environmental and social challenges in urban areas. The government of China concerns the positive effects of the sharing economy. In 2016, sharing economy as a term was written into report on government work of China for the very first time. And the central government began to encourage sharing businesses in many ways. According to China Sharing Economy Development Report to 2017, more than 700 million people participated in the sharing economy in China. The growing number of businesses and all kinds of sharing practices are changing living in China on a deep and large scale. Sharing practice have been extending to the diverse areas like transport, space, food, and so on. Among those, transport is probably the most popular areas, and it's attracting billions of dollars investment. The sharing mobility companies like Didi Chuxing, Mobike, and EV Card are stars in China. They change the way to commute in urban areas, but fundamentally bring the opportunity and the challenge to the city be more sustainable. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Lan. So I think you gave a good idea of the scale of the disruptive change which is happening in China, and as you say, it starts having consequences much beyond China. Now I would like to turn to Tom and to see how do you see the relationship in between sharing economy altogether and maybe sharing in the mobility sector and globally the urban sustainability. Is there a link or this gets completely disconnected?
No, I think there is a link. I mean, urban sustainability is simply an imperative in our growing population, with our growing population. People are moving to cities at unprecedented rates. Recently, we crossed the line where more than half the world's population lives in cities, and that number is expected to grow to 5 billion by 2030. So urbanization has the potential to transform society towards more sustainable development, but it's not going to happen automatically. In fact, urbanization can create more pollution and more intensive forms of consumption. There's a measure that we call social metabolism, which is the flows of materials and energy that go from nature to society. And what we know is historically, this social metabolism has increased when people move to cities, when they become urban residents. City dwellers consume more available energy and materials than other forms of human society. And this cannot continue indefinitely. Disruptive innovations like the ones being described for the transport sector in China have the ability to break this trend and reorient us towards what must become known as the triple bottom line. And on the slide there, you can see that. That's where the economic, social, and environmental values are mutually supported. Sharing is already a positive value embedded in society, which has the potential to inform business models in transport and other sectors, and reduce negative impacts on the planet, thus achieving this triple bottom line of sustainability co-benefits. Technical innovations like sharing economy platforms, which facilitate greater sharing of durable goods among urban residents, can be efficient in reducing material and energy consumption, thus rendering urban metabolism more sustainable. However, while the sustainability payoffs can be high, they won't happen without coordinated investment, infrastructure, and regulation to produce and maintain the triple bottom line of sustainability.
Okay, so now we see there is a huge challenge there. There is disruption happening. Tom, you hinted at the fact that can be articulated and that can be triggered towards urban sustainability, but that can go other ways. So maybe now, Yuka, you want to elaborate a bit on what are the challenges, basically, when can we fulfill this sustainable opportunity space, which is brought about by this sharing economy?
Thank you, Diana. Exactly like Tom said, sharing economy as a disruptive innovation has brought a lot of opportunities for sustainability. But at the same time, the challenges are profound as well, because it fundamentally challenged the existing government, business, and individual relationships. So for example, in the sharing mobility sector in China, which is our main focus of our case study. In the business area, sharing mobility companies like Didi Chuxing, which is a ride-sharing company, the EV Card, which is the electric vehicle sharing company, and Mobike, the bike-sharing company, they have fundamentally challenged the traditional taxi, automobility, and bike industries. We are very familiar with the protests of those traditional industries against the digital sharing giants and digital sharing business across the world. And apart from such tension between the old and the new business practice, we also see tremendous tension between the different sharing firms doing similar business. A key characteristic of the sharing economy in China, as well as in US and to some extent in India and Southeast Asia, is this fierce competition between sharing startups, each backed by national and global venture capitalists, digital giants. They do it through rapid and sometimes very irrational market expansion. So their competition has resulted in massive distortion of service price and urban infrastructures such as roads and parking. And for individuals, we also see this both the horizontal and vertical types of tensions. For example, in the EV and bike sharing systems, some users misbehave, such as vandalism, theft, and illegal parking. So the tensions exists between users who behave and users who misbehave. Also, in the sharing economy, a participant is required to change their roles between being a consumer and a co-producer, or sometimes they also have to play the role of both consumer producer. And that, as our studies shows, induce some conflicts of interest and identity anxieties. And in the end, it is the tension for the government. The government at the different levels, for example, the central government and the city government, they see sharing economy very differently. For example, the central government of China saw the direct sharing business as an opportunity to solve employment problems. But the city government were not happy about it because it attracted massive numbers of underemployed or unemployed labor from surrounding areas that challenge the already very scarce resources in cities. And also, even at the same level of the government, different departments look at this disruptive change, disruptive innovation very differently. For example, the Department of Employment and Pension, Department of Innovation, Department of Transport, they all look at it differently. And so all of these tensions have resulted in policy inconsistency that is not very good for sustainable development in cities.
Okay, so we see there are challenges. There are challenges at how to basically make this transformation, making it possible. And you have tensions and challenges in between different actors. You discussed at different levels of regulation, tensions in between competitors in the marketplace, tensions between the good and bad behaviors at the consumption level. So basically, maybe Lan, you can elaborate a bit on how all these different actors do respond and how they would respond to these challenges.
Okay, here I'd like to take a Mobike as an example to explain value co-creation relationship to respond to tensions and challenges. Many cities in China have a serious transport problem like long commute, last mile problem, heavy traffic, and severe air pollution. Mobike is a free-floating bike-sharing system in China, which vision is to bring bicycle to city. It considers the urban transport problem and hopes the bicycles return can get a more eco-friendly, more equal and safer city. However, its value proposition couldn't come true with any enable actors and collaborative relations. At first, Mobike needs the local government to empower it to operate its sharing business, to draw the white line parking blocks beside the road to facilitate the user to pick up and park the sharing bikes. However, when number of users grows, some users take a system advantage like illegal parking, destroying bikes and dropping the bikes in the middle of a road, affect the system performance and urban management. Then Mobike began to use rules to punish those misbehaviors and design the credit system to encourage users to report the misbehavior and broken bikes. A user hunter community is established by users to support the credit system and promote the sharing spirit in the city. The hunter helped Mobike to report the misuse and the possession of broken bikes, even to replace the bikes to a hunter shelter beside the road. That move becomes a role model parking sharing bikes. Though the local government are enjoying the benefit of bringing bicycle to city by Mobike and its users, they have to respond to the pressure of the right of roads of cycling to refigure the urban infrastructure resources like biking line, parking places. The local government also try to support hunters' behaviors and connect mobile credit system to public credit system.
Okay, so what I understand, it's like we need a strong value proposition and a positive value proposition, so that actually this is how we actually talk in our projects about win-win, and even actually win-win-win-win to the different stakeholders and actors involved in that proposition. But of course, the balances are very hard to establish in between the different value for the different actors. So now I would like to get back to Tom, and maybe you can elaborate on the governance challenge which this disruptive change is bringing. So,
sure. Well, as we've seen in the transport sector, whether it's bikes or cars, the sharing economy necessarily involves public goods. And the question is, how will disruptive innovations like we see in Mobike or in other transport in China, how will they affect the public goods, including public spaces and services? And how will these impacts be regulated? This is a governance challenge, and in some cities there has been what we might term a tragedy of commodification and a tragedy of the commons, which set schemes in bike sharing. A tragedy of commodification can occur when investment rushes in to commercialize a product or service, creating distortions in supply, demand, and price stability and sustainability. Similarly, a tragedy of the commons may emerge in public spaces that are flooded with things like bikes, as we see in the photo here. A business may simply calculate that in order to gain market advantage over competitors and establish user demand, they can simply put more and more bikes in public spaces, because if they don't, the competition will. And this is the classic tragedy of the commons problem, and we find this in Chinese cities where in Shanghai, for example, they had 1.5 million bikes on the streets and then had to take a third of them off because people couldn't move around and it was creating chaos and disorder. So these kinds of disruptive innovations can only be adaptive if they transform us towards a new and more sustainable order. This is really the governance challenge, to break down the unsustainable transport system and engineer a new one that can coordinate the partnerships and regulation between government, business, and citizens, the consumers.
well, thank you very much, Tom. So I see that we have these challenges in terms of governance, but I would stay a bit more on this level of challenges and maybe implications, not only challenges, but maybe even positive implications. So, but not only the governance level will stay a bit, but what are the implications for the different stakeholders who already talked? What's happening to consumers? What's happening to producers? What's happening to all the parties involved? Maybe you want to elaborate on that.
Yeah, so we have seen, like Tom said, the Chinese government, the city level government, have been trying to remove those flooded bikes. That's one way of governance. But what we have seen from our research is that there are emerging patterns of social partnerships and value co-creation practices that the government can harness the power from the city and the agencies from consumers to try to solve the problem of tragedy of the common. What we have seen there, profound value co-creation behaviors and patterns between consumers, producers, and governments together to promote sustainability in the cities. As we show in this graph, first of all, producers and consumers in the sharing economy are already playing part of the role of regulators. from the producer, like producer can be a co-regulator, because the sharing firms, especially bike sharing, electrical vehicle sharing firms, they are providing some a kind of service that can enable better public transport. So their proper functioning becomes part of the city's transport infrastructure. The firm's management of shared bikes and electric vehicles become vital in maintaining order of city's scarce road and parking resources. So producers in this way play part of the role that was previously performed by the government. And consumers is the same similar case, as our empirical data shows that the accumulation of consumer misbehavior, such as illegal parking and illegal riding, will cause serious dysfunction in the sharing process as well as in public spaces. So, but the consumers, like the bike hunters, if they can participate in active value co-creation, such as helping the system to detect and prevent misbehavior, they can help to promote this green and shared transport for the city. In this context, consumers are not only contributing to the firm's sustainable value co-creation process, they are also playing part of the government's role in regulating public spaces and safeguarding social sustainability. In the meanwhile, we also see that the government is also playing part of the role as producers and consumers. The Shanghai government, as well as a lot of other Chinese city governments, they provide strong support for a lot of these green and sustainable shared mobility schemes, such as the Shanghai government. They promoted this electric vehicle sharing system, and they provided a free or subsidized car license, parking resources to enable such a business to take off. At the same time, government was also a pioneer consumer in those cutting-edge new business models, such as the Shanghai government. Again, they were the first adopter of the electric vehicle sharing system, EV cards, in the city. So we see that the role between those three important categories of stakeholders are shifting, merging, and those value co-creation patterns has a profound impact for policymaking, because we need to, instead of just dealing with the consequences, the policymakers can try to harness those positive energy coming out of the society and to transform it or direct it into the most sustainable trajectories.
Well, thank you very much, Hugo, for these clarifications and points you are making. So just to wrap up things, basically, so we have disruptive change, which is brought about in this urban sphere, and we talk specifically the case of the urban mobility and the transforming urban mobility. And then we looked at, is that urban mobility basically changing towards sustainability, or is that going somewhere else? And as we could see, it just doesn't go there by itself. And I think one of the interesting and important points which was brought about by the three speakers is this question of value co-creation and changing roles of consumers, changing roles of producers, changing roles of government altogether. And I think what is really interesting is also to see the role of the social capital, which is getting built or getting eroded, and how that's playing with changing, bringing this change towards sustainability or not. And just to summarize, I would say, to end this talk, I would say China seems to be, and particularly the urban context in China, an incredible space for experimentation, from which many other cities and actually the different stakeholders can learn. So thank you very much to three of you, and we are, of course, very happy to have and respond to questions or bring clarifications. So back to you.
Thanks a lot for the talk so far. I think it's really interesting, and also to hear the case study from Mobike in China. We've had some questions coming in, one via the website from Elisa. Thank you, Elisa, for asking that question. The question is, why do you think people would spend time and energy in co-creating in these biking systems?
Okay, so why people would spend time in co-creation? Who wants to have a go? You go, Len.
I think people love the business model like Mobike because they give them convenience, give them the more flexible commute in the city, and when someone to destroy this system, they just feel like, wow, why you destroy the good things? Yeah, it's all companies for the city, not for one. So I think it's the main reason.
Yeah, so
yeah,
because when we were doing a lot of interviews and digital ethnography with the user groups, especially those Mobike hunters who voluntarily invest their time, energy, and sometimes their physical assets to help maintain the system. And we also did a survey, a large scale survey. The result is already published in the Journal of Sustainability to ask why they participate in that. And we see this strongly that people find such disruptive innovation sparkle their passion about sharing and their passion about a better city life. So that's something really motivate them. But how can we sustain such a positive behavior through better policies, through better company strategies? Is a question for all the other stakeholders. Yeah.
Well, I'd say maybe just a little point on this one. One thing we've also found, and I don't think it was mentioned, that is, it's also the game-like behavior, where basically people compete in who is the best, basically, even in this providing this good behavior, So you have, of course, the kind of contribution to the public good, but moreover, you have this, kind of internal good competitions in saying, well, who's getting more credits, who is. So you have a kind of Pokemon-like effect.
Yeah.
Back to you.
Great answer. Thanks for that. We have one more question coming in from Abraham. He asks, how does change work in a Chinese system? Since you mentioned that change, to be able to implement these new sharing systems, you need change from all different stakeholders. So yeah, how does that work within the Chinese system?
You want to have
Well,
please.
Just going back to the example of the hunters, it would be a question, the change is a self-organization. So you had a group of consumers who are in this sharing economy that were not anticipated and were not a product of government or of business, somehow emerging and trying to essentially establish standards and good conduct behavior amongst the consumer base. And that's quite interesting because we know sharing is always underpinned by values of reciprocity. And obviously, if people don't change their civic behavior to follow those values of sharing and reciprocity, the system will break down. But people who had begun to use the system then said, we don't want that system to break down. We want that system to have efficacy. And to do that, we need to help regulate it. And that process is sometimes called prosumption. And we're interested to see how that develops. But whether you can rely on that is another question. And we think it's probably pretty fragile, and it needs to be supported with more formal regulations and incentives for proper behavior. But by doing that, you will have institutionalized change. So I think that's one way that change can happen.
Well, one more comment on this question I would like to make is, a lot of studies were done, quite long ago, actually, on things like Wikipedia, how that emerged, and the sabotaging, because a lot of sabotaging happened, at least at the beginning, and how a kind of collective attention was, triggering, trying to see how to keep these bad behaviors away, because and there were with Linux and other kind of collective efforts where basically you create a public good. So I'm not saying this is the same. Obviously, there are very different aspects. However, there is also kind of looking in retrospect and build up on in terms of understanding and what are the features and what's happening and how what's happening today is very different or not from what happened before.
Okay, and one more question. So you've mentioned about change in the Chinese system now, but you are currently working from the UK. So I was wondering, how does change differ if you think of sharing systems in the UK compared to the sharing systems in China?
Okay, so you can maybe
yeah, it's the sharing economy in China and because the sharing economy as a concept and as a disruptive business innovation started in the West, right? We have seen there are very different trajectories have developed between the OECD countries and China, because in Europe, especially in Europe, a lot of Europe as well as the UK, it's a more regulated market, especially in crucial urban development areas like housing and transport, as well as food. So when such disruption came about, you will see the protest from either the labor or other stakeholders, as well as the regulation would come in to regulate. So basically, in the West, it's a much more cautious attitude from the government. Well, in China, because things develop so fast and the capital were very, very rich, they attract huge amount of venture capitalists from Silicon Valley, from national capital, so that it developed so fast, and the government had an attitude to encourage its experimentations. So the scales are completely different, we will see. But now we see they are converging in a way that, on the one hand, in the first couple of years, there was a sharing practice invented in America, in the UK, coming to China, and now we are seeing the Chinese sharing companies going abroad. Now, for example, Mobike and another Chinese bike sharing company called Ofo are operating bike sharing system across 170 cities in the world. They already came to Manchester, to Cambridge, Oxford, London. So we will see more interesting pattern, and we are interested in comparing how the social consequences of same sharing system differ in different culture and political systems.
Yeah, I think in China and UK, they have different total cultural context and different city infrastructure and also the population density. And I think they will be maybe have a different path to develop this same sharing system. So we will see. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think I'd like to wrap up this session with one last question, and that is where do you see this whole sharing economy in China going in the future?
Well, so the future of sharing economy in China, where do you see it going?
We have to try to guess.
You know, the future is fiction.
Well, I think you could say it's definitely at a crossroads because it has developed so rapidly. We know that there's a demand for this kind of services, this kind of sharing, and we know that there's businesses and investment willing to occupy that space. But we've also seen these things like tragedies of the commons and real questions coming up about, you know, what's the basis of sharing behavior in a commercial economy, and how are things like public resources going to be safeguarded in this context? And some of these things have been taken for granted. I think, you know, that the sharing behavior already exists, and when it gets commercialized, it will continue to be as it is in a social sharing relationship. And similarly, the public space will be able to absorb this. And we've learned in China that's not the case. So there have to be additional innovations in governance and maybe even in behavior to actually allow this economy to develop even further. But I think one thing is for certain, and others can add, is that these app-based, we've all taken to mobile phones, and if something can be organized informationally and materially through your phone, it's very likely that it's not going to be put back. The genie is out of the bottle, and this innovation is here to stay. So it's just a question of how to balance all of these different factors.
Yeah, you have something to say.
Yeah, I think the future will be the relationship, how we deal this relationship, and we know the value co-creation thing, and we must engage everyone. Every actor must engage something into these relations and change maybe their roles, their actions, and to advance a better future, I think. Yeah.
And those relationships are really what keep the triple bottom line intact. And if one of them becomes skewed or takes over, like profitability, then things become distorted and you lose that triple bottom line.
Well, one last thing about this, I would say it's really important to think also, all that it's innovation, and we talked about disrupting innovation, but you have also to think about what we call ex-novation, which is basically what do you do with the incumbents, which basically they lose. We keep talking about win-win games. However, sometimes you have losers because the disrupting change is bringing about really problematic issues for some. So the question is, how do you think about it? Do you reshape, do you reframe the game? And who is doing that?
I think that's a great takeaway to end this session and to leave people thinking about it a bit more. As you said, Tom, the genie is out of the bottle, and I think we're all very curious on how this all will evolve in the near future and later on. Thanks a lot for your session. I enjoyed it a lot. And thanks everybody for viewing online. We are having a lot of other sessions coming up in the next 2 weeks. One, for example, this afternoon is the kickoff of the circular design case at 5 p.m. GMT. And if you've missed out on any of the sessions, don't worry. We have DIF on demand, and you can watch all the sessions back online. Thanks a lot, everybody, and that's it for now. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye. Bye.